Okay, we are going to continue talking about emotional intelligence. Let me just get my slides going here. So here we are, emotional intelligence part two. We ended off in our last session saying, be careful about making assumptions, be very careful about jumping to conclusions. Daniel Rushing, age 65, was stopped in Orlando for speeding when the officer spotted a rock-like substance on the car floor. The police report stated, I recognized through my 11 years of training and experience as a law enforcement officer, the substance to be some sort of narcotic. Of course, it was not. It was Krispy Kreme donut flakes. There was a lawsuit over this because he was arrested, and I believe he spent some time in jail. So there was a settlement for $37,000. Please, the idea of the Zen Buddhist idea of the beginner's mind is something to think about, right? In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. So obviously there are situations where, especially if you're in a job where you see different things happen over and over again, once you see certain circumstances, your mind will immediately say, I've seen this a million times before, I know where this is going. As soon as you are saying that, stop yourself. If you're in a mediation, a negotiation, or an arbitration, and say, hey, maybe it's not what I think is happening. Try to have that beginner's mind that there are many possibilities and try not to leap to the one that you think immediately that it might be. My favorite example of this, of somebody who jumped to an incorrect conclusion, was a woman who bought a wedding dress. She wrote to the bridal shop because her dress was supposed to look like the picture on the left. She tried the dress on, and the dress as you see on the picture on the right, looked nothing like the picture on the left. So she wrote the bridal shop and complained about it, and they immediately wrote back and said, you put the dress on inside out, please put it on the right way. So how do you prevent yourself from making assumptions and jumping to conclusions? Christopher Argyris, who taught for many years at Harvard, thought a lot about how we think, right? Thinking about thinking. And he came up with this wonderful idea called the ladder of inference. This is simply people jumping to conclusions. And he tried to analyze why and how this takes place. So if you were to take a ladder and put it in a pool, like let's say there's a large pool in somebody's backyard, and you take a ladder and put it in the pool, the data, there's a pool of data at the bottom, right? The data is all the information in the entire world. And then you've got that ladder sticking up out of the pool, and you have several steps on the ladder. So the first step is you have to select a subset of data. So you select data. The second step on the ladder is you add meaning to that data. And the third step is you draw conclusions and finally take action. And this cycle is repeated again and again and again throughout the day. And very importantly, the yellow bubble on the right-hand side that says beliefs and assumptions and values, this indicates that at every step of the ladder, you are incorporating your own beliefs and values. Anything that you get from your own training, from your own education, from your parents, from belief structures that come from religious training or anything else, at every step of the ladder, you are being influenced by those beliefs and values as to what data you select, how you add meaning and interpret that data, and the conclusions that you draw. So there are 3 rungs. Again, step 1, step 2, step 3. The idea I'm encouraging here is for you to try to stay on the first 2 rungs of the ladder. Selecting data and interpreting data. Those are the first 2 rungs. So how do you stay on those first 2 rungs? Always be open to new data. There might be additional data. There might be competing data. There might be conflicting data. If you really analyze that thoroughly and ask the question over and over, what's your data? What's my data? Is there other data? Is there competing data? And then secondly, move up to that second rung on the ladder. What's your reasoning, right? There might be different ways to reason the situation or interpret the data. And if you remain on those first two rungs of the ladder, it's much more difficult for the conversation to become heated. Now, if you were to watch the Sunday talk shows, the political talk shows like Meet the Press and all the other shows, oftentimes they get guests on there, and all they're doing is simply yelling conclusions back and forth. And they're at the top rungs of the ladder. And that might make for sort of exciting television, but it's not necessarily the best way to come up with the best resolution to a conflict. The best way is to really try to remain at those first two rungs of the ladder. And remember that there are three sides to every story: your side, my side, and the truth, says author Jen Roberts. It's really critical in ADR, in mediation, negotiation, and arbitration. However many parties there are, those are the number of truths there are. And your job is to figure out everybody's truth. And it takes work to do that. This is a great story that I'll read. At Penn State University, there were 4 sophomores taking chemistry. All of them had an A so far. These 4 friends were so confident that the weekend before final exams, they decided to visit friends and have a big party. After the party, they slept all day Sunday and didn't make it back to Penn State until early Monday morning. Rather than taking the final exam that morning, they decided to skip the final and then explain to their professor why they missed it. They told the professor they visited friends, but on the way back, they had a flat tire. And as a result, they missed the final exam. The professor agreed they could make up the final the next day. The guys were excited and very relieved. They studied that night for the exam. The next day, the professor placed them in separate rooms and gave them a test booklet. They quickly answered the first problem worth 5 points. Cool, they thought, each in their separate rooms, thinking this was going to be easy. Then they turned the page. Written on the second page of the exam was the following: for 95 points, what tire was flat? It's a great story, and it really underscores this idea that you've got to think about questions in ADR, right? Ask good questions. And I say 5/5 because almost in any mediation or negotiation or arbitration, there are going to be 5 questions that you know are going to come down the pike from the other side that you know you have to answer. You have to think ahead of time what those questions might be, how you might answer them, because if you don't explore those ideas ahead of time, you might appear like a deer caught in the headlights of a car. That in itself can give the other side a tremendous amount of information. So think about what those questions might be prepared to answer them. And I say 5/5 because there are a number of questions that are going to be coming toward you. There are also 5 or 10, however many questions that you need to ask of the other side and that you need to get answers to in that mediation or negotiation. And I would physically write down those questions ahead of time and have them written down while you're mediating or negotiating. Because here's the thing, oftentimes people evade questions or try to switch the subject or dodge them. And if you're not careful, right, you're going to walk out of that mediation or negotiation without getting an answer to those questions. And you'll say, wow, I never got an answer to this. If you physically write them down and check them off only after they've been answered, that can be very helpful. So anticipating the questions that might be asked of you is critical, and it takes a lot of preparation time. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is a wonderful book by Dr. Stephen Covey. It's been out for some time now, maybe 20 years or so, but habit number 5, I think, is one of the most important habits. Seek first to understand and then to be understood, right? You seek first to really figure out what's going on with the other parties before you try to tell them what's going on with you. And this is not a new idea. This is St. Francis from over 100 years ago. Grant that I may not so much seek to be understood as to understand. When you come upon brilliant ideas, oftentimes it's been thought of before. And the idea is to listen to understand, right? I was reading a book once that was talking about somebody within a firm, and everybody in that particular firm thought that this person was the absolute best listener in the firm. So the person who was writing this, I can't remember if it was a book or an article, but he basically said, I want to go and talk to this person. Why is this person such a good listener? Upon sitting down, when he entered the office and then sat down, this best listener in the firm, what he did first was he took his cell phone, turned it off, opened a drawer, and placed it inside the drawer. He didn't just turn his cell phone over, he turned it off and physically put it inside a drawer. He also took his laptop computer, turned it off, and shut the lid so that he couldn't see it at all. Those 2 actions alone are tremendously powerful signals to anybody who's sitting in front of you that you are really going to focus on them and listen to what they have to say. And everybody in the firm thought this person was the best listener. It took this journalist to figure out what exactly is going on here. Why does everybody think this person's such a good listener? Carl Rogers was one of the most influential psychologists in American history. He argued that a major barrier to communication is the tendency for people to judge, to evaluate, to approve or disapprove the statement of the other person or the other group. So think for a moment how much you engage in those behaviors. Many people engage in those behaviors, and they really are a major barrier to communication. We all know when the other side is not really listening to us. We know when they are engaging in judgment of us instead of listening. We know when they're trying to think about how they will respond to us instead of really listening to what we have to say. One solution to this is to pause before you respond, right? Just pause for a short time before you give your response. This indicates that you're really thinking about what the other parties are saying before you're willing to respond. There's nothing wrong with silence. People are uncomfortable with it, but there's nothing wrong with it. I think that television dialogues really influence us on how we think we're supposed to engage in conversations. But television dialogue is so artificial. It's back and forth quickly, quickly, quickly. There's no pauses. So we all feel funny if we allow for there to be a pause in order to think about what somebody has said. And I encourage you to experiment with this in the coming days to see if you can do this, because the other side will quickly realize that you really are listening to what they're saying and engaging in the conversation. Another tip is to repeat the following 3 words to yourself inside your head during the conversation. What might these 3 words be? Here are the 3 words. Maybe they're right. Maybe they are right. If you have that in the back of your mind and you literally even say it to yourself every once in a while, this gives you an entirely different approach and focus in the conversation. Your behavior will literally change if you keep this in mind as you're engaging with somebody in conversation. Why does it work? It forces you to be more open-minded, right? It prompts you to say things like, hey, tell me more. I'm not sure. I don't know. Please explain. That kind of approach can be very effective in a conversation. You're trying to indicate to the other side that you're really listening and really wanting to understand them. It makes you become curious, right? Why do they see it that way? Makes you less likely to raise your defenses or judge their comments, which we just learned can be one of the most serious barriers to quality communication. And it makes you look closely for shortcomings in your own views and positions, right? Maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm wrong, or maybe we're both right. But if you have this idea that maybe they're right, it can lead to an entirely different conversation. So you will not be able to get the other side to consider what you're saying and proposing until they themselves feel that they've been fully heard, completely understood, and without judgment, right? So if you ask the other party, hey, tell me if I have this right, blah, 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 blah. If they say that's exactly right, right? Only then will they start listening to what you have to say. And really, I know that some of this sounds a little bit simplistic or squishy, but if you experiment with this to see how powerful it can be when you have conversations, I think you'll be amazed. Here's my last point. There's a book called The Power of Nice, How to Negotiate So Everyone Wins, written by Ronald Shapiro. It's a wonderful book, and it's a book that I started reading when I first started studying conflict resolution. And at that time, I was on a flight from the East Coast to the West Coast. So I landed in Chicago as a midway point, and we were going to take off from Chicago. We were on the runway for 2 hours because there was a large storm. Finally, at midnight, the pilot came over the intercom and said, sorry, folks, we've got to go back to the gate. You have to leave the airport and go to a hotel and come back in the morning. We'll fly out in the morning. And by the way, this is due to weather, so we're not able to pay for your hotel. People were not thrilled. And I watched, because I was reading this book on The Power of Nice, and I was interested in, I had just started studying conflict resolution. I watched the flight attendant as she dealt with the passengers who were coming off the airplane. By the way, people were furious, and they were so mean and rude to the flight attendant, right? One passenger literally said, do you have any idea who I am? And she responded by saying, no, I'm not sure who you are, which I thought was a great response. But anyway, after all these passengers left, I went up to her and I said, I've just started studying conflict resolution, and it was very interesting to watch how you handled those passengers. She opened the drawer where she was standing at the little desk, pulled out a coupon and said, do you have any place to stay tonight? Because this is a coupon for the Marriott down the street. So even though they couldn't pay for anybody's hotel, she was able to give me a coupon to stay at the Marriott for free down the street. She also took out another pad and said, these are coupons that will work at any store in the airport. They're for $20 each. Let me give you 3 of these. So I had $60 to enjoy a wonderful breakfast. It occurred to me at that moment, yes, the power of nice is very real. Most people that you interact with can be helpful to you or neutral or make your life tougher. And it was a really important lesson for me to learn. So with that, we'll conclude for now, and I will see you soon. Thanks very much.